With a Venmo debit card, you can Venmo more than just your friends. You can use your balance in so many ways. You can Venmo everything. Need gas? You can Venmo this. How about snacks? You can Venmo that. Your favorite band's merch? You can Venmo this. Or their next show? You can Venmo that. Visit Venmo.me/debit to learn more.
You can Venmo this, or you can Venmo that. You can Venmo this, or you can Venmo that. You can Venmo.
The Venmo MasterCard is issued by the Bancorp Bank N.A. pursuant to license by MasterCard International Incorporated. Card may be used everywhere MasterCard is accepted. Venmo purchase restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Knowing you could be saving money for the things you really want, like that dream house or ride, is a great feeling. That's why the State Farm Personal Price Plan can help you save when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the Personal Price Plan. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
Hello and welcome to the Oregonian Sports Podcast. I am Bill Oram, joined by Brenna Greene. As always, Brenna, I'm dealing with some kind of tickle in my throat. My voice isn't quite where it normally is, which means that the amount of passion I want to put behind this first thing may not come across as robustly as you might normally expect.
Did someone have too much fun at their conference this past weekend?
No, absolutely not. So we're going to try this.
Okay.
What did I tell you about Deandre Ayton? What did I say?
I mean, for all intents and purposes, is that he shouldn't be on the team, which I don't disagree. I never disagreed with that.
I said, you say, Deandre Ayton, here is your $35 million. Enjoy a gap year in the Bahamas, and then you can be a free agent. They took it one step further, and they just paid him to go away, which is great. It's a great day for the Blazers.
Yeah, I mean, it's been reported that it was DA's side that asked out. I think I personally would be pretty shocked if he goes anywhere other than the Lakers at this point, who desperately need a center. But I mean, it says something that the Blazers were like, "Oh, you want to just go?" And okay, sure, great. Most teams would be like, "Can we try to trade you and get some sort of assets out of this?" But that was never going to happen. It was a very, very. It's not a secret if it's well known. It was very well known that the trade market for DeAndre was less than ideal, and that was that. So, do I still think that the trade that they pulled off 2 falls ago was worth it? Yes, because they got Tumani. But yeah, I mean, another quote-unquote era done. I will miss his locker room sound bites. That is the thing I will miss the most about one Deandre Ayton. Your thoughts?
Well, one, a buyout doesn't happen without both sides being pretty excited about it happening. So
agreed.
I think the Blazers were one of two things. They were. I didn't have buyout for DA on my bingo card, but now that we've had a little time to reflect on it, it does seem like it was the obvious outcome here.
Yeah.
Because even if you were committed to just writing out his contract and letting the money come off the books in 2026 and getting that $35 million in cap relief just by letting him become a free agent, you still had to deal with him for the next year. And what do you do with him as a member of your roster?
Yeah.
He was, for all intents and purposes, the 4th or 5th most important center on their roster.
Yep.
And the highest paid player on the team. Those things do not align. And so the other option probably would have been just to bench him and take him out of the rotation. And I don't know how DeAndre Ayton would have handled that. I don't know how that would have gone over. And so it is possible, oh yeah, this came from his side. That could have come after he was told that he should not expect to play next year. I mean, I'm obviously fully speculating, but that is how these conversations go. Like, yes, we've drafted centers each of the last 2 years. Both of those guys are going to play next year. You are, and Robert Williams is, an expiring contract who needs to play. So our expectation going into the year is that you would play behind all three of those guys. So maybe the idea of a buyout didn't start with the Blazers, but I think it's a reasonable suspicion that the Blazers made it pretty clear where he stood in the pecking order, and that then he would have asked for the buyout. So the buyout the reason I think buyout wasn't really on my radar is it's just such a big number. You don't see that very often with a guy that's like $35 million. And it does tell
26, 27 years old. Yeah.
Right. It does tell you what the trade market was for him. That, and first of all, it's hard to absorb a $35 million deal.
Yes.
But also a $35 million deal for a guy who, maybe you want playing 18 minutes off the bench. And, the Lake, there will be a team that wants Deandre Ayton for $3 million on a minimum. Maybe there's a mid-level exception out there for him, but I suspect it's going to be the minimum wherever he goes. And, sure. Could it be the Lakers? I guess. I don't know if I think that his skill set fits. I think there's other guys on the market who fits them better in terms of defense. But my opinion of Deandre Ayton, as we've established in previous episodes of this podcast, is really low.
Poor.
And not even really relative to his contract. I mean, especially relative to his contract. But I don't think he is a player that you can win with. At least not playing, a major role, and probably not as a starter. So, offensively, an extremely gifted player who, decides to use those tools, once every few weeks. And so, I think it's pretty buyer beware, but certainly a chance for Deandre Ayton to, hit the open market, find a team where he might be a better fit, and to rehabilitate his value, which is obviously, I mean, the way this went down speaks for itself in terms of where his value was around the league. So the Blazers have done two fairly cutthroat and decisive things in the last week, Brenna. Obviously buying out DA, not, avoiding, going into next year and testing the trade market and hoping that there's something at the trade deadline and yada, yada, yada. And trading Anfernee Simons to Boston for Jrue Holiday, a deal that none of us saw coming. And if you'll indulge me for one more second, I have a bit of a story about how little we saw this coming.
Yeah.
Which is that trade happened on Monday of last week. Is that correct?
Tuesday. Wait.
It was Monday.
No, it was Monday. Yep.
I got a phone call from an NBA source at 6 p.m. This is somebody who does not work for the Blazers or the Boston Celtics. At 6 p.m. on Monday saying the Blazers are being linked to Jrue Holiday. And I said, I don't know if I understand what you mean. Like, that they would trade for him? And like, yes, it doesn't make sense to me. Can you help me understand why the Blazers would be interested in Jrue Holiday? And I couldn't do it. I was very confused. And so I had that conversation, went home and made my kids dinner. And then I texted somebody from the Blazers and I said, hey, I have something to run by you. Because it felt so far-fetched.
Yeah.
And the person I texted took like 10 minutes to get back to me and said, what you got? And I just sat there and looked at my phone. And I was like, this is so preposterous that if I say, is it true that you guys are interested in Jrue Holiday? I felt like I would be exposing myself as somebody who like is not actually sourced. Like, it was so far-fetched. I thought it was going to make me look bad to ask if it was even possibly true. So I said, you know what? Let me sit on this a little longer and see if like I can figure anything out before I like actually share. And so, whatever, resume my evening, basically sit on the tip about Jrue Holiday. And at 9:00, here comes Shams that deal is happening. And I don't know if I've definitely been more surprised by trades in my life, like Luka, more surprised, but I was blown away by this because it did not immediately make sense to me.
Yeah.
And so I spent some time, I slept on it before I like wrote a column about it. And I've gotten to a point where I feel pretty good about it for the Blazers. Yeah. And I can break that down and why I think that's true. But when you combine the Anfernee deal with the Deandre Ayton buyout, the Blazers are just very aggressively clearing up their personnel issues. Deandre Ayton does not make sense for this roster. Not a good fit, really in any regard. Anfernee Simons, great offensive player, longest tenured Blazer, wonderful human being, all those things.
Yep.
He was in the way of the development of Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe. Like, it was really hard to make that 3-man group in the backcourt work.
Yep.
So they solved two of their most glaring positional issues. The third is obviously Jerami Grant, and I'll get into later why I think that's going to be harder to clear up. But they have made that such a priority. And when you think back on the last several years of the Blazers, their strategy's been so murky and all over the place. We're going to give Jerami Grant $150 million. We're going to take on these vets, and then we're also rebuilding through the draft, and we're tanking but trying to win for Dame. It's like, I think the Blazers, with these two moves in particular, have shown that they really have a clear direction and are really, finally handing the keys over to their young core: Denny Advia, Toumani Camara, Shaedon Sharpe, Scoot Henderson, Donovan Clingan, Yang Hansen. So I'm excited for the Blazers. I have a column up on this right now that essentially they're finally being honest with their fan base about where they're going and who they believe is going to take them there. And I think it's really refreshing after the last several years of the Blazers.
Well, yeah.
So I'll get off my soapbox, drink some tea. Why don't you tell me what you thought of the Jrue Holiday deal and where you've landed on it?
Yeah. I want to circle back to one thing that you said prior, by the way. You're saying you didn't expect the DA deal. You want to know who also didn't expect the DA deal? Bill Simmons and Ryan Russillo. I don't know if you've had the honor of listening to their podcast that they put out yesterday. DeAndre comes up multiple times in the podcast. They're like, could Bill theorized that there could be a trade on the way with Utah, the Lakers, and Portland, sending DA to the Lakers. Russillo at another point made mention, he goes, I can't wait for the DeAndre Ayton quote when Yang Hansen takes his minutes for the first time. Like, the locker room soundbite is going to be incredible. Like, I haven't even gotten all the way through it. So maybe he came up another time. I don't know. I doubt it. But I was like, this guy came up in at least 2 different parts of this episode. That then, as soon as it got posted, was immediately null and void when it came to that. So that was hilarious. And that just tells you how much people didn't expect this happening.
Well, you just see it so infrequently at such a high dollar value. And I would love to know how the backroom discussions on this went. Yeah. Because if the Blazers were candid with DeAndre about where he fit in, it makes total sense that he would want this. This is a guy who believes that he still is an all-star level talent. Wherever he shows up, next season, assuming he finds a home. Like, I can't imagine he agreed to a buyout without having a team in mind or a belief that a team is going to take him. But DeAndre Ayton is a lot closer to being out of the league than being an all-star. Yeah. And so, but I fully believe that when he signs with, the Hornets or whoever, if it is the Lakers, sure. But show up, it's going to be the same thing. Huge smile, happy to be there. Get back to being who I am, which is dominating. And it's, again, great opportunity for him to rehabilitate his image wherever he goes. But his belief in, who he is as a player and the way he's viewed around the league are very different things.
Our friend Sean Hyken texted me and he said, I'm so excited for the next Zach Lowe podcast, mostly because Zach loves the nickname Dominatin'. And he's like, he's just going to say it as much as physically possible. So I had to share that thought here because, I might have to listen to the next Zach Lowe podcast just to see how many times he can fit in Dominatin'.
It's a great nickname. One, just at face value, it's a great nickname. And two, it's an even better nickname for a player who doesn't dominate. It's much more hilarious that he is the self-proclaimed dominating. It would be like me naming myself, incredible, but just sucking.
You stay ready with your puns. Good job.
I'm going to get back to being who I am, incredible.
Okay, 2. in the list of things there. Two, you know, one of the things about the older players that are on this roster, not that Ayton is older, you know, the more experienced, the more tenured players. You have Deandre, you have Anfernee, you have Jerami. Okay. Mm-hmm. You could put Matisse in there. But Matisse is I feel a little bit different than those three because Matisse isn't a starter.
He's not in the way.
So yeah, he's not in the way. So you think of those three guys and you really need one of those three guys to be the certified leader of this team. And that is just not any of their personalities. You know, Deandre is kind of I'm going to have fun guy. Anfernee is just a quiet dude. And then Jerami is more just kind of like smooth with it, you know? There's no like high or low with Jerami. He's just very like even keeled. But none of those guys have that leadership aspect to them. So there was all these young guys in a room who really desperately needed a leader, and there just was no clear one on that roster. And when all of your older guys don't have that prototype in them, it's a really hard thing for a team to navigate, I think. So I understand the Jrue move just from the fact of bringing someone in who has that quality to him already set. And now, is Jrue excited to be here? That remains to be seen.
Okay, I'm going to address that. And like, I don't know. It's possible that he's stewing about this.
Yeah.
But here's what I would say about if Jrue Holiday is unhappy about being traded to Portland, and the reporting on that, you know,
it's iffy.
I think like you said, I don't think we know the truth there.
Yeah, I think it's iffy.
One, Jrue was also like very angry to be getting moved out of Milwaukee, you know, and it's like, you know, and you know, there were tweets at the time and it was like a whole thing. Well, he got traded to the Celtics and was able to win a championship and get a huge payday. Why? Because the Blazers worked with him on finding him a new home and a place that was going to be the best case scenario for him. And so what I would think the conversations between the Blazers and Jrue Holiday, you know, would look like going forward were, hey, you know, we helped you facilitate, you know, a really important step in your career. We worked really closely with you and like, you know, we didn't hold on to you for value. We didn't like try to like, you know, complicate your life. We wanted to get you where you could, you know, flourish immediately. And we did that. Mm-hmm. Now we are asking you to come back and help us. And I think that first of all, no player who likes where they are and is in a championship situation and a vital player on a championship situation is going to be happy to be traded. Like Jrue Holiday has a family, you know, he's a very loyal person. You know, I wouldn't expect him to be happy that he's being traded to a team that's in a rebuild. Do I think he will buy in and be amazing in the locker room? I do. Like, I do not think this is going to be an issue. I know I could be proven wrong, but it would just not be in his character to create an issue about this. I don't see it. I don't believe it. It was the same thing when the Blazers tried to message that they were, you know, that Dame was going to be angry if he got traded anywhere other than Miami. Well, you know, he could be angry, but he's going to show up and be a great dude because that's who he is. And like, so there's, you know, there's whatever, you know, pressure points you try to utilize to get to where you want to go in a trade. But I also think that we're talking about players of, you know, exceptionally high character. Yeah. Like Jrue Holiday might be the best dude in the NBA. Yeah. Like if you asked 30 GMs, if there's one player in the NBA you want, you know, you could draft one player from the NBA to be your leader in the locker room and on the floor, Jrue Holiday would get a lot of votes. And so I just think that this is probably overblown. I think he makes sense for the Blazers in the locker room and on the floor. Like he doesn't, He doesn't get in the way of Shaedon and Scoot's development in the way that Anfernee Simons did. He's more of a utility player than a pure point guard or a pure two guard. I'm sure, of course, he wants to keep winning championships in Boston. But the reality of being a $35 million high-level role player in the NBA today is you become an issue on the books really fast.
Yeah.
And the Celtics are in a teardown because of the realities of the CBA. And Jrue Holiday knew that. And so, the Celtics, he was a bad contract and a player the Celtics had to let go. Like, his numbers were down last year as well. But is he a bad contract for the Blazers? I'm not as sure that he will be. I mean, it could end up looking kind of like an albatross, but if you have a belief, or if you have faith that he's going to like bounce back from the year he had in Boston, and that contract gets shorter, and you think that he's going to stabilize your locker room and give you something that you did not have and frankly desperately needed, then I think it makes sense for the Blazers. And people look at the draft picks as sort of an indicator of like who won the trade. Like, yes, the Blazers they did a contract swap. The Blazers took on more years, and the Blazers gave up the draft picks. But the Blazers also got a player they wanted on their team.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can really overstate that piece of it. And those draft picks, they were immediately replaced with, a few days later in the draft 48 hours later in the draft, when the Blazers traded down from 11 to 16, they got 3 draft picks. They got 2 seconds and a first. Well, that first, essentially recoups the first that was lost in the trade for Denny Advia last year that everybody lost their minds over. Like, why are the Blazers sending out draft picks? They got that pick back. It's not the same pick, but it's in the same draft. It could be a better pick. And then they got 2 seconds back. Well, those essentially replaced the 2 that you sent out in the Anfernee Simons Jrue Holiday deal. So I wouldn't freak out too much about the draft picks piece of it.
Yeah.
I think there's reason to look at the Jrue Holiday deal as maybe a little bit of a low risk gamble. Like, even if he doesn't age well, and if, you're in a position where it's like, hey, we're paying this guy $35 million and he's not playing well, we can't even put him on the court. Okay, that's not ideal. But you also at least can say, but we have one of the best dudes in the NBA and one of the best leaders in the NBA in our locker room. Like, the Blazers don't have that in Jerami Grant. They didn't have that in Deandre Ayton. They didn't have that in Anfernee Simons. So you at least are having a player who brings real value to your franchise in spaces that you didn't have before.
By the way, my Anfernee Simons trade story is that I was on the phone with my mother, sitting at work taking a dinner break, and looked down at my phone, had a text that said, "Well, hello," in all caps, and went, "What?" Immediately checked Twitter and went, "Oh my God." I'm like, "I'm sorry, Mom, I gotta go. I was supposed to drive down to Lakeview last week." We talked about that, to my mom's hometown. And I immediately got on the phone after that, and I called her back in 10, 15 minutes, and I was like, "Look, I think it's a bad idea." And I'm glad that I decided to stay. And by the way, for anybody who's like, you should have gone and seen your mom, my mom wanted me to stay too. So you want to know what? Everyone was happy.
You chose aunt over mother.
I did. But it was more so like I chose the Blazers as a whole over my mother, because all of a sudden it became extremely clear to me that, oh, okay, they're actually serious about doing some things this summer. Finally.
Yeah. And listen, like, there are a lot of reasons that the Blazers adding a 35-year-old combo guard who, makes more money than anybody else in the roster and, is coming off of, his biggest letdown season. All of that is like true and doesn't quite fit. But I think for all the other reasons we mentioned, there's something to be said there. The other thing I'll say about the players the Blazers have at the top of their payroll now, including Jerami Grant, including Jerami Grant, is they are players who at least, in theory, defend. Like, Jerami Grant, I think, is a little overrated as a two-way player and a defender, but like, he still gives you stuff defensively.
Yeah.
Jrue Holiday is still going to be really valuable on both sides of the ball. That's not true of Anfernee Simons and Deandre Ayton.
No.
And so even if they're older and they're, overpaid, relative to what they're going to give you if they're coming off the bench, they still do like the things that you need. They still fit the identity of the team. Like, they are both, guys who, especially Jrue Holiday, two-way players who are going to be awesome. Again, now I'm talking about Jrue Holiday, awesome defensively alongside Toumani Camara and Denny Advia and Donovan Clingan. So, they fit the identity of the team.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be great for Scoot, by the way. I think if Scoot Henderson is going to make it in the NBA, which is still a question, having Jrue Holiday right there, is going, that's
great
the
person
best
to learn from.
Yeah, it's the best person he's had around him since he joined the Blazers.
Yeah. And just generally my 200-foot view from all of this is the Blazers are finally deciding to stop having their franchise have 1 foot in one pot and 1 foot in the other pot. And I'm just so excited to not have to deal with that dichotomy anymore of this team that had oddly 2 different timelines at the same time.
And that's what I was saying earlier. Really for all 3 of the, years that, well, certainly I've been here, but since Joe Cronin became the full-time GM of the Blazers. So, I think that they finally have, they had chosen a lane. They've always chosen a lane. The lane was always, we're going young and we're building through the draft.
Yes.
But their roster makeup didn't reflect that. And therefore, what Chauncey Billups had to do on game night did not allow him to fully embrace the decision they'd chosen to go. Now they finally have. Now he can. We're going to learn if these guys are good enough to lead the Blazers into the playoffs, now or eventually. Like, we were not going to be able to learn that if Deandre Ayton and Anfernee Simons were still playing big minutes because they, were veterans and, highly paid.
I think one of the things that is repeated again and again throughout the NBA is even if you go young, you still need vets on a team to help lead.
Totally.
Because if you go fully young, it's a complete disaster.
But you need the right vets.
Yeah. The thing about the Blazers is that they had too many of the wrong vets.
Correct.
It was not the type of vets that you want. And then, you had, 3 guys right there. And if you want to count Robert Williams, it'd be 4 who just didn't, it was these guys that were just eating minutes that didn't fit the timeline and didn't provide any sort of foundation for the new guys.
Yeah.
And so I'm just, even though, yes, obviously Jrue is an older guy, as we've discussed, he has that leadership quality that those guys don't have as much.
Yeah.
And I think Rob actually is a great leader, but once again, it's not like it's just different. Jrue is he is in the top echelon of NBA leaders. And so just for that, I understand. When I first saw the trade, I thought to myself, oh, they've got to be sending him out again. But once I heard, okay, they're going to stick with this, it was like, okay, well, all right. So then it took me a while to wrap that around. It seems to me that Jrue will end up coming off the bench, which is, I don't know if that's going to stick. We'll see what happens. I'm fascinated to see how that goes. That's my most interesting thing right now.
Yeah. So, I think in my opinion, it was like, okay, they're going out and they're acquiring him. They are essentially buying his services because like there wasn't a super robust market for Jrue Holiday. When you look at like what people in Boston thought was going to have to happen, they thought that Brad Stevens was going to have to attach draft capital to incentivize somebody to take him. And so there was a lot of reaction in Boston, like, oh, more Brad Stevens magic because, he actually got draft picks back instead of having to attach draft picks. It just shows you how much the Blazers value what Jrue Holiday is going to be able to do for them. Mm-hmm. I think there's some risk associated.
Yep, absolutely.
But I don't think, I think that, I give Joe Cronin a lot of credit, and I've written this kind of throughout his tenure. He is somewhat unorthodox as a general manager. He does things that, do feel counterintuitive. But he believes in them. Mm-hmm. And I think that, one of the hardest things you can do in a leadership position is make unpopular choices and believe in them. The Denny Advia trade, nobody's complaining now, right? Like Denny Avdia has validated himself, but there was still like a philosophical question that persisted throughout last season, and I'm sure still to today, about whether it made sense for the Blazers to be surrendering assets, draft picks, to acquire a really like elite role player. Like if Denny Avdia is your best player, what is your ceiling as a team? Like, on a championship team, Denny Avdia is probably like the third best player. So for a team that doesn't have its first two best players, does it make sense to be surrendering draft picks to get Denny Avdia? That's the thought, the thinking. But like Joe believed in it. Joe thought there was incredible value there. He thought that they weren't giving up as much as other people thought, that the value of the contract. And so he pulled the trigger. Same thing with the Jrue Holiday deal. A lot of people scratching their heads. Joe believes in it. The Hansen pick, the Yang Hansen pick, he believed in it. And like, there's obviously, it's come out since the draft that there were other teams, it sounded like, that were, on him too. And Joe told me after the draft that, they were sweating it from 11 to 15, that somebody else was going to swoop in and take him. They don't think they were alone in the middle of the first round on Yang. It seemed like they were, and it feels like a reach. And it's one of those reaches that like, you're either going to end up looking like an absolute genius, or it's the lead to your obituary. It's like, an unprecedented reach for a player who, never made it. It's like, so, I mean, there's real risk with a pick like that, and Joe doesn't care. And so like, I admire the
gall, the gumption.
Yeah. Just his belief in the decisions that they make. Like, I mean, anybody who, manages to public opinion is doomed to fail. Right. Yeah. But I think that Joe, kind of even beyond that, Joe is, has real belief in like sort of his plan. And like, I think that you're starting to see it come together more this week than at any point in his tenure. You're seeing, okay, like it's finally coming together. Did it take too long? Sure. Are you having to solve problems that were somewhat self-inflicted? Sure. But at least you're getting some like real clarity that has been missing. And so I think, I think Joe deserves a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. We haven't really talked about the draft yet, so should we transition to that? There's just a few things going on in the last.
I know it's a huge week. In really, I mean, and not just in the NBA. I do want to get to some things beyond the Blazers, but let's touch on the draft pick real quickly, because it was like, as I just alluded to, it was kind of another out of left field Blazers front office decision.
Yeah, I mean it was really wild. I think you were there.
I wasn't there when they made the pick.
You were not there when you made the pick. Oh my goodness. So I had just basically walked in because I went live in our 4 and 5 and supposedly 6 o'clock shows, which they did not get to the draft pick in time. Boy, did they take their sweet time this year, because we were able to get the Donovan Clingan pick in at 8 during our sportscast last year. We had to switch a few things around, finesse some things, but we got it done. And that would have been around like the 550 range. They were not close to pick 8, or they were close, but it would not have happened in the 550 range. So anyways, I had pretty much just walked in. I'd maybe been there for like 10 minutes. And it was silent in the room. And then all of a sudden, Sean Highkin blurts out, Yang Hansen? And the whole place went, what? Like so many people were like, well, didn't prep for that one. Like nobody had a lot of people had no clue who that guy was. Once I was reminded of what he did at the combine, I was like, oh yeah, I remember there was some Chinese guy who had a good combine, but that's about it on my knowledge. I mean, it's funny. Jamie Hudson and I did a show before the draft, like a preview show before the draft online. And we both had, who we thought our top 3 picks were for the Blazers. And Jamie had what she considered a reach in Jace Richardson from Michigan State. And I texted her after and I go, man, it seems like you should have gotten way more bold, girlfriend. Like,
yeah, no kidding.
We both just had zero clue this was going to happen. And I mean, I thought that they were going to pick a forward to kind of back up, Tumani and Denny, since I figured that Jerami was probably on his way out. I did not figure up until, last night that they picked a center and Deandre was on his way out. Did not see that one coming. So once again, but I thought there was no way they were going to pick. I thought I didn't see them picking a point guard because, as we've discussed, I really think that they want to give Scoot the keys, and drafting another point guard. They've got enough ball handling on the roster right now, I think. And I didn't think they'd draft a center because, look at their center situation. They've still got, they've got 4 centers on their roster. Like, that's still crazy. So I didn't think it was going to be a center. So yeah, the whole thing was just wild. Am I a fan of the pick? I guess it remains to be seen. The big point that's been put out there is that, he wasn't dominating in the CBA. Mm-hmm. And normally international leagues are a pretty good indicator of how somebody is going to do in the NBA. And there were a bunch of washed up NBA players who were playing better than him. Now, we have to remember the kid just turned 20.
Yeah.
So that's my one kind of caveat to that. But still, Luka was young, and obviously that's a different situation, but he was dominating in Europe. So it's apples to oranges there, I would say. But yeah, personally, so, the thing about Yang is this, and this was made a point on Bill Simmons' podcast last night. And I'm like, well, at least somebody's saying the quiet part out loud around there. Just drafting him, it does help with the financial bottom line, I would say.
Yeah, the Blazers are now going to be one of the most popular teams in China as the team is for sale. Whether that is the reason that they made the pick or not,
I think it's a nice bonus.
It's a fact of the situation that the Blazers now are going to be very closely watched by, however many, 2 billion people, 1 billion people. It's that's a huge deal. When you consider the popularity of the NBA in China and the fact that, there have only been a handful of players from China, Yao, Yi, and now Yang, there's going to be an opportunity for the Blazers to really, explode in terms of their global appeal. So that is undeniable. As far as, what I thought was going to happen in the draft, obviously, Yang was not on my radar at all, but I was with you. I thought they were going to go I thought they were going to do the thing that, it seems like they're doing, which is who does what, Tumani Kamara does, and, who is, because you watch the Pacers and it's they have 10 dudes who are these two-way forces, it's Nembhard and Nesmith, and, they just have guys who play defense. And so when you looked at who was left on the board or, kind of was going to be available in their range, you start thinking about, Asa Newell, you think about Carter Bryant from Arizona, Derek Queen doesn't play the defense in that way, but there are people who like Derek Queen, Asenge from France, Blazers are kind of developing a bit of an international, locker room. A French player made some sense there. And so I was kind of on that train. When we got to 10 and Carter Bryant didn't go to Phoenix.
Yeah.
I thought that they were going to draft Carter Bryant.
He was number 1 on my list for sure.
And so when that was what I thought they were going to do. So I think you and I were obviously it sounds like we were of exactly the same mind.
Yep.
So again, my opinion on this is if you make a pick like that is seen as an incredible reach, you really have to be right. And we'll find out over time, like how much of a reach it really was. And, as much as I admire the draft experts, the mock draft folks, like they are not NBA executives. They're not they are, no matter how much basketball they watch, no matter how much scouting they do. And listen, like Sam Vecini is a friend, John Hollinger is a friend. Like they are out on the road, like watching players. They're going to college games. They go to the international, events that draw scouts as well. Like they are watching this as scouts as much as, journalists. But they also don't need to make the draft picks at the end of the day. And so I do think, at least in their current roles, John Hollinger's made plenty of draft picks in his career. But the point, is that, the Blazers, they were comfortable with the boom or bust sort of nature of this pick. That like this, has the potential to be a hugely high upside player to deliver value from the middle of the draft that generally isn't there. And I again, this goes back to Joe being willing to make decisions with conviction when others don't see it, and believing in their scouting, and believing in Sergi and Mike Schmitz. And so I'm very intrigued by the pick. Do I like the pick? It's not my job to know whether or not they're right. Like, I have questions. Like, because man, if it doesn't work, it really kind of signals, because I don't think the Blazers have drafted that well since Joe's been there and Mike Schmitz has run scouting. Like Shaedon Sharpe might be good, but like this is kind of a make or break year. Scoot so far has underwhelmed. There's the second round's hard, but Ryan Rupert doesn't really look like an NBA player. Chris Murray doesn't really look like an NBA player. So it's like, okay, so you haven't really nailed your draft picks. Klingon, okay, we'll see. But if this pick hits, that is, I think it's an all-time, if he becomes a starter level player, like it's an all-time, international scouting victory. But if it's a miss, then you really kind of question what they're doing there. So it'll take time for us to figure that out. But I think it's a huge indicator of how good this front office actually is.
Yeah. I'm really interested. All of a sudden, the Blazers Summer League roster went from, quite frankly, completely uninteresting to extremely interesting with this pick. And I'm going to be down there, and I can't wait to talk about it on the pod, because I know what this is like to a certain extent because of Rui Hachimura at Gonzaga his senior year. Yeah. And that was crazy. This is going to be doubly or triply crazy at Blazers practices with him.
Yeah.
I cannot wait to just see the madness and the hoopla. And also, I just want to, say this as somebody who, we talked about his value to the franchise. I posted one 10-second soundbite from him on my Instagram on Friday. I'm up 100 followers from that day.
Well,
so and Instagram's really hard to get followers on, by the way. I know. Let me get a violin for you, Brenna. But anyway,
you posted it as a reel. How many views did it have?
I know it has 13,000 likes right now. Let's see. Let me do some real in-time investigation on this pod.
It's real. Well, let me make one point. Let me make one appeal to the Portland Trailblazers, somewhat tongue in cheek, but also not. As you do that, we've talked about the facility or the arena and some of the areas that they need to do some upgrades and that they're kind of they're working on. I guess I don't know that we're going to get much in the way of structural changes while the team is for sale before a new owner comes in and is able to do it themselves. That said, boy, I would not hate if they expanded that media workroom, especially if we're going to be joined by some of our new friends from China, because when you talk about already a place that's kind of hard to find a seat to sit down and work on deadline,
it is.
I think that's going to be an issue into next season. So if the Blazers haven't thought about that yet, Rosson Gathers, you listening? Think about hiring a contractor to expand that press room. Natalie King, you listening? Dwayne Hankins, let's get some.
Yeah,
let's get some blueprints going.
As actually somebody who knows
Not just a rebuild of the team, a rebuild of the press room.
Yeah, no, actually, like, I cannot vouch for this more because that was the biggest issue at Gonzaga. I mean, with Rui, they literally had to move us out of the press room and just set up tables outside in the concourse in the bowels of the arena because there was no room for anybody anymore. And yeah, like it was basically like that room was like cut off from us because there just was not enough room for everyone. Like Mark Few's press conferences that were out in a hallway afterwards became a fight to the death to just get, in position where you could point your camera to see him. So, yeah, I can definitely vouch that press room that they have right now, most nights it works because there, quite frankly, are not a ton of people covering that team right now. But like the end of the season, you're hard pressed. Like the last game of the season, you're normally pretty hard pressed to find a spot in there. You probably should try to get in there early. You add the Chinese media into that, it's gonna be bonkers. So yeah, that's a really great point. And as somebody who lived it herself, I can vouch that it can get really, really testy. So yeah. And by the way, it has 387,366 views right now.
I mean, that tells you a lot. Brenna, we got to move on from the Blazers.
We do. We're 40 minutes in. This is going to be a longer one for us, I have a feeling.
But there is a lot of interesting stuff. So we're going to try to breeze through these other things real quickly. But so the Thursday, I broke the story about the Blazers, or not the Blazers, the presumed fire, moving on from their president Inky's son. Inky was hired at the beginning of April. Didn't make it to 3 months there. There's a lot within that.
Yeah.
What was that?
I said consternation.
Sure. And what I wrote too is like, it raises a lot of questions kind of about, how this team is being run and what, and kind of what the direction is, when you're talking about, we're expecting a, brand identity reveal on July 15th. Unless something has changed, unless a certain columnist has really affected change, I think we know what that brand identity reveal is going to actually reveal.
Mm-hmm.
But also, this team is 10 months out and doesn't have a general manager, doesn't have a front office staff.
Not good.
The time is ticking. Free agency for this like heralded offseason, where you have players, including Sabrina Ionescu, who are going to be free agents. I'm not trying to say Sabrina is going to come home, but certainly like there's a great free agent class in 2026. Blazers is an expansion team. The Valkyries have kind of raised the bar of what an expansion team can do. So this team needs to get to work, and they, in a lot of ways, have been behind schedule. Now, is it too late? I mean, first of all, I hope not. Like, I really want to stress, like, it's so important to the city of Portland for this team to be a success and to have to capture the heart of the city, because and I'm going to write about this at some point, but I really want to emphasize that, in a time when everybody's kind of been moving out of Portland, and like still the outside image of Portland is not back to where it was pre 2020. It's not even close. You have the WNBA investing in the city. You have the Bethals investing in bringing something to the city. You are bringing eyes for something positive to the city. And I think it's really unfortunate for their rollout that, obviously I have been very critical of the Fire branding. I think it's a bad brand. I accept that we're probably stuck with it. I think it's a miss. I think they should have done more. I think they should have invested more in better marketing, a better marketing partner to come up with something better. I think it's a miss. But that being what it is, but losing the momentum of the rollout and losing 3 months of work that your new president put in, who was already starting late. Like, they had a hard time identifying candidates for that job. And you get Inky in, and she puts in 3 months of work that now it's like, well, what did she actually get done? Like, and what stays and what ended up not actually mattering. So now but what I will say is they, the woman that they have hired, Claire, oh my gosh, help me out. Claire, what is it? Hummel?
Yeah, Hamill, I think.
Claire Hamill. Sorry. I totally had I totally spaced out. Comes with just, a wonderful reputation.
Yeah, seems to be very highly regarded.
She's worked on the apparel side with Nike, for 43 years. She has worked closely with the WNBA. She is well connected. She is, an incredibly high reputation. The people I heard from after reporting that she was going to be the interim president were, one, very distinguished in their own right, and two, spoke unbelievably highly of her. So you do take a negative, right, of the black eye of changing presidents 3 months in, to a positive of bringing in somebody who people look at and say, now that's a serious person. Claire has still not, she is not a WNBA executive. She's not worked on the team side, which I think was one of the issues that they ran into with Inky. Like, Inky had not worked in women's sports. She had not worked in women's basketball. She had not been on the team side. She was kind of on an island. It's like, hey, here you are, started a WNBA team from scratch with ownership that's in Southern California and a CEO in Mike Whitehead, who's still in Sacramento. Like, she was kind of on her own. And I think that, that's where it fell apart. And one of the things I said when we were talking about the fire branding, Brenna, was who in the room is representing Portland and kind of is kind of speaking up for Portland and offering a local perspective. And, I failed to mention in that conversation that Karina LeBlanc is obviously part of that group, and she's been here, for more than a decade. So, I mean, she certainly has some perspective. Yeah. But, Claire is a local. She has been here for decades and decades and decades. I actually don't know where she's originally from. She may not originally be from Oregon. She may be.
We're grandfathering her in regardless.
If you've got 43 years here, we're going to go ahead and think that you've got some pretty good local perspective. 43 or more years here, we're going to say you've got some pretty good local perspective. So I think that's valuable, obviously well-connected, highly regarded. I'm assuming that this is an interim job that gets, through. I don't know if this is I don't get the sense that this should be a 6-month interim thing. Like, this is somebody who should be taking you to launch, to the start of next season or through the first season. People have asked if she could be the permanent person. I think that's just a question of what she wants. I mean, she's in her early 70s, I believe. So, I mean, that's, she retired from Nike at the end of last year. When you retire, you have visions of what your retirement is going to look like. And I don't think most people's retirement looks like, hey, I'm going to launch a new sports team and that's going to be the next 10 years of my life. So, I mean, we will find out what that ultimately looks like. But I think that the real takeaway is that Portland WNBA, the fire or not fire, took a negative of having what they deemed to be the wrong person in that position and turned it into a positive by hiring Claire. That's a lot from me. I'm sorry to ramble, but I'm curious kind of how you view the kind of those developments from the WNBA. And by the way, sorry, I'm doing it again, but WNBA is expanding again. They have 3 new teams as of today. They announced expansion in Philadelphia, Detroit, and Cleveland. We talked about the Rockers before. The WNBA is growing. So there's now more mouths to feed. There's now, I mean, obviously those teams are a year further out than Portland, but there are more teams that are to contend with. There's one thing to be saying, hey, we're going to be competing in a 15-team league. Now you're competing in an 18-team league, and it's a lot easier to get left behind when there's 17 other teams than when there's 14 other teams if you're not on top of your game. So
that's exactly where I was headed. The pressure is on.
Yeah.
Like, Toronto has had it way more together.
Yep.
Now, to be fair, did they have more time? Yes, they did. They had
4 months
more time.
more. Like, not dramatically more. It was 4 months. They were announced 4 months before the September launch of the WNBA team in Portland, but it is more time. I agree.
It is more time. Toronto's felt like they've had it more together, and now you have these 3 other franchises breathing down your neck.
Yeah, exactly.
So, they got to get it together. I don't know what else to say. Like, this is not a fantastic look, and I'm sure with this combined with the fact that there are people who agree with you about the fire, there are also people who obviously disagree with you about the fire. Sure. But that it was not a universal slam dunk of a name. That there has been some consternation about the naming. So those 2 pieces of news coupled together, and the fact that, like you said, they do not have a GM, which needs to be filled like yesterday. Thank you. because you can't hire a coach until you have a GM. So let's get it going, baby. Yeah, I mean, it's making it look. I don't think we're at the full level where it's unserious right now, and I don't think that they're unserious. I mean, they're building a practice facility,
Yeah.
But it certainly is not in the other direction. And yeah, it's just
I think that's really fair.
Yeah. And as we've said, we both hope that this team is a rousing success. But right now, it rightly, I think, gives a lot of people some trepidation of where things are headed. And they have a very limited amount of time to right this ship. So I'm glad that they found somebody that, people have a lot of respect for. Great. Cool. You got to keep putting the pedal to the metal and get something going. Because right now the vibes are not as sterling as you would hope for a team that's launching. I mean, right now we need to be in the honeymoon phase, baby.
Yeah.
Like, this is a time where everyone's like, oh, yay, blah, blah, blah. And that's just not the vibe right now because everyone is a little anxious about where they are in this rollout.
And also, like, gosh, I mean, if it is the fire, why are we waiting until July 15th? Like,
yeah, I don't get that either.
Because, like, there is, pardon me, I've definitely spoken to people who, can make a case for the fire and, that there's an argument that it's sort of like, the nostalgia play is strong enough. And you've talked about that. You like the nostalgia play.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I don't think there's as much nostalgia for it as maybe they hope, but we'll see.
Yeah.
But like, if you've got kick-ass branding, if you think that if you think the fire tells a story that's different than what my interpretation of it has been, and I've written about, and gotten a lot of feedback on in both directions, as you said, then I would want to start telling that story as fast as possible. Because otherwise we now have another 15 days of like, is it really going to be the fire? Do we like the fire?
I really wonder if
is that bad?
I really wonder if they moved that event up already, because before the fire, before our friend Sean found that trademark, they announced a conference in Portland having, it's a conference like being the global epicenter of women's sports. It's all about that. And one of those days was a day where it kind of felt like they had circled for announcing the team name. There was some event on some day that was very ambiguous during one of those in that press release. And I thought to myself, all right, that's naming day. Cool. So I wonder if they already moved it up to the 15th, because it sure seemed like they were tipping their hand to something on, I think, like the 25th.
Interesting. Brenna, we've got to go fast just because there are other people who want to podcast at the Oregonian, Oregon Live. I want to touch on the other kind of breaking news of the week, which is the Pac-12 getting to an 8th team, adding Texas State in all sports, right? All sports.
Yes.
Texas State, if you remember, we haven't talked about Pac-12 expansion for a long time, but I think this was the best available choice, right?
Yep.
Like, the Memphis Tulane thing, could still happen down the road. You're not necessarily locked in at 8. UNLV, we'll see kind of what happens with the Mountain West, rights thing. But in terms of just getting to 8, Texas State, location-wise, regionally, a little speculative, but not as speculative as Sacramento State. Sacramento State's trying to get into one of these leagues, and like, good on them. But Texas State has done the work, and I have it here from their press release. Just some of the stuff that they're sort of heralding and crowing about is, you've got to, not only the money is being poured into Texas State, so they've done. They have a new football practice facility that was $37 million. $149 million has gone into the facilities and athletic infrastructure at Texas State since 2022. They have a $23 million naming rights deal. Like, this is a school that I covered a little bit. I had an internship in Austin in 2008, Austin, Texas, and San Marcos is, down the road from Austin, between San Antonio and Austin, maybe 25, 30 miles south of Austin. And kind of a non-entity at the time, at least in the eyes of like the sports department at the Austin American-Statesman, and San Marcos, Texas, just wasn't really moving the needle. And they came to Montana one year to play a playoff game. Obviously the Grizzlies triumphed, obviously, but not a player on the national stage. They've made the steps to change that, and they are in a hotbed of recruiting. This raises their profile. They, obviously, that helps the rest of the league. You can go to all those high schools in Central Texas and throughout the state, but especially in Central Texas, and say, hey, we'll get you a home game, and so I think that this is a fit. It's the same kind of fit that if they'd gone and gotten UTSA as well. I think this is the right choice. I'm glad they got it worked out. I think this does make the conference feel more complete. It's obviously not what the Pac-12 was and what Oregon State was and, all that. Yeah. But I like the fit. I'm glad this was the 8th school. I'm glad it wasn't something random like, South Florida or something. I'm pleased that this is how they got to 8 and how they can get to, their, completion.
Yes. Just would like to say, how crazy of a week is it that we are basically making the Pac-12 being whole as a footnote in our podcast? I think that says everything. So maybe we can revisit this.
And I'm sure we will. And also I want to acknowledge that we're recording this podcast on Monday, about 2 hours before free agency opens in the NBA. The Blazers don't have cap space. I wouldn't expect, a flurry of activity from them, but they certainly, have already kind of been ahead of the curveball here in terms of making moves. So if we miss something that happens in the early hours of free agency, which starts at 3:00 Pacific time, and you're listening to this after the fact, and you're like, why didn't you talk about the Blazers, signing so-and-so? We're recording.
Can't even come up with a name because this free agency class is not good.
Why didn't you write about the Blazers signing Chris Paul to a minimum contract? Whatever it is. I think that, by the way, Chris Paul, think about what Chris Paul did for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in his 1 year in Oklahoma City.
Yep.
I think that's the play the Blazers are making with Jrue Holiday and Scoot Henderson. That was also my column last week. But anyhow, that's just my caveat. Brenna, it is the heart of summer. I don't want to keep saying that we will be back next week with a podcast. We may be back next week. We're going to figure that out, but we will.
I would love to be back next week. So if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I said I would love to be back next week. If it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
I just don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. I want to underpromise and overdeliver. So we'll talk to you all when we talk to you. Brenna, thank you so much for your insights and perspective, making it happen on a Monday. Wow, we're on top of it this week. On top of it. All right. Thank you for listening. Tell your friends about the Oregonian Sports Podcast, rate, review, all the things that people on other podcasts tell you to do. Do that for us too. Okay, I'm going to drink some more tea. Brenna, thank you.
Bye.